Today I want to talk to you about a very important concept, and that is time. Now, if you're aware of what's going on with the Great Reset and the agenda, we know that by 2030, they want us to own nothing and be happy. And so what I've got here is a graph I've just drawn up here, which you'll see up the top left here. Hopefully you can read that on the screen. If you can't, this is good times and more freedom. So the higher on the graph, the more good times and freedom, and then we have time across the bottom axis there as well. Now, what's happening is as we move closer towards the Great Reset and what they want for us with the 2030, by the time we get to 2030, our good times and freedoms are going to be down here, down the very, very bottom, where basically we're going to own nothing, we're going to be apparently happy, we're going to have no privacy, and none of the things that we consider, or at least I consider, good times and more freedom. Now, this starts up here. This pathway is very, it's easy to see, and we're already a fair way along it. Right here, we've got 2 weeks to flatten the curve. If you guys remember that 2 years ago, 2 weeks flatten the curve. Right, crazy. If I can do that properly. Then we had lockdowns. I might not write that down. I might not write it each and every time. But we had lockdowns there. Then we had the vax passports. Well, I shouldn't say vax passport, the mandates for taking the vaccine. Then we have, the boosters they're trying to push on us as well. Next up, we're going to be having social credit scores through what they're calling the ESG score, which is Environmental, Social, and Governance score. Now, that's happening now as we speak with a lot of large corporations. And so what's happening is as we go down this pathway, we're going to have more of our freedoms taken away. You look at what's happening over in Canada, or has happened over in Canada, with the government seizing bank accounts, or freezing bank accounts, my apologies, and then seizing the donations made for the truckers. You can see here we're having a steady erosion of our freedoms being taken away. Now, countering this is down the bottom here. If let's just draw a line like that. This line here is people waking up to what's going on, right? So as they take more freedoms away, and as this quality of life comes down, I'm sure the elites or whoever's planning all this is planning for this as well. They know that people are going to start waking up to what's going on and resisting and pushing back. Now, again, I think they've already planned for this, and they know that there's going to be a point in time where the quality of life is going to be that bad, where the majority of people are going to wake up, where the critical mass is going to wake up, and that's what I'm going to call the point of no return. Now, no return. Once we cross this point here, we won't be able to do anything to try to get our freedoms back at all. It'll be done, right? And that's when the gates will close. Or the fence is closed in, the gate's closed, the gate is slammed shut, and the lock is locked, and we are, for want of a better word, screwed. And so I believe they know that there is a point in time where there's going to be a critical mass of people who wake up, but they're also not going to be too worried, because by that time, there's nothing we're going to be able to do about it. Okay, in terms of, we'll already have ceded and given up too many of our freedoms and our privacies. Now, what we need to do is, what I believe we need to do is we need to get to the point where we wake up enough people before we get to that point in time, and we can do that by accelerating or decelerating things along this path. But essentially, the only way that we can prevent this from happening is by getting the critical mass of people to wake up before the gate slams shut and the padlock is locked behind us. Now, what I want to cover in this video is a few things to talk about how we can do this, and it's not all doom and gloom. I've got a few notes here I want to look at the screen just to make sure I've got everything going okay. But look, when we get to this point of no return, what does this actually look like? This, in my view, and again, I'm getting all this stuff from the book, The Great Reset, so we are doing I'm in the middle of recording a review of all this, so I've got all my notes here, and I'm going through and picking out key parts of this to read out to you guys. But if you haven't gotten it already, make sure you get this book and read what's going on, or go to the World Economic Forum's website, and it's all up there on the website. But what does this point of no return look like? It looks like total control. If my pad's going to work for me here. It looks like total control. It looks like reliance. It looks like lack of privacy. So, for example, we're going to be reliant on the system through universal basic income or the central bank digital currency. We're going to have a complete lack of privacy where basically they can see all of our transactions, all of our search history, everything on there that they can control. And we're going to have, what else we're going to have here? We're going to have reduced travel and contact due to whatever climate emergency. So essentially what that means is as we move more into the metaverse and the online world, we're going to have less physical contact with our neighbors. And at that point in time, essentially with AI the way it's going, again, this might be a little bit out there and just a theory or thought that I've got, is that if something was to happen to someone, let's just say they're imprisoned or taken away or for whatever reason can't be there online or whatever it is, there will be AI avatars and also voice and everything that can actually impersonate that person. So there's a lot of things that we can do, that they can do. But the point is, when we get to the point of no return, that's when they have total control. We have total lack of privacy. We have nothing that we can actually do to try to prevent this. Now, what we need to do, we need to realize that we are in a war, right? Now, we are not in a war against COVID, which is what Klaus Schwab says here in the Great Reset. We're actually in a war against this agenda, against the Great Reset. We covered this in a lot more detail in another video, and we'll probably do several videos about this, but we've seen an evolution of warfare. So if you think back to the Civil War times, and you think back to even World War I and all those eras there, the military conflict, or the war, I should say, was pretty much all just the military and the soldiers, right? So civilians could go up on the picnic or up on the hill and watch the first battle of Bull Run, I think it was, in the Civil War, and they thought this is perfectly because no soldier's going to engage the civilians. But the problem was, though, because there's a lot of military conflict in the war, that meant a lot of military violence and action, and we've got casualty rates that are absolutely huge back in the previous wars. You think World War I especially, Civil War and World War II as well. As time has progressed and we've moved towards where we are now, the war has evolved from purely military conflict to less military conflict, but more focus on the civilian population. And a watershed moment and a key point in time is the Vietnam War. Militarily, North Vietnam lost that war. They had way more casualties. I think it was over 10-to-1 casualties in terms of soldiers lost versus the US and Allied force numbers. But they won the war because they could get, they basically got their media and the will of the population, the civilian population in America, to go against the war and to turn against the soldiers, right? And I believe that was a key and critical point in time of this evolution. Now, as we've progressed forward, you could arguably say that Iraq or the Afghan forces, or ISIS, or not ISIS, sorry, Al-Qaeda and the Taliban have won the wars there because, again, militarily they've got their butts kicked. But we've just witnessed last year, a disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan by the US forces. And again, it was won because the will of the people was subverted. And so if you think through to what's happening now and the current times, it brings us up to right now, there is still military conflict, right? Russia's invading Ukraine as I record this video. It is the 1st of March 2022 as I record this video, for those of you who are watching at a future time. And there is definitely still military conflict. That's not going to go away. However, it's a lot more limited in scope than it has been in the past, and countries or nations are far more averse to getting into military conflict. Instead, what they do is they turn their time and attention on the civilian population. And this is arguably what China's been doing, probably even Russia as well, against the Western population. And I'm sure we're doing the same against their populations to the best of our ability as well. So the whole point of this, and again, we go into a lot more detail on that in future or other videos, but the point of this is for us to understand that we are at war, right? We are at a war. It Seems a little bit weird, but it's the case. And the other thing about warfare is that we seem to fight, or we always fight the previous war. So there's a saying in the military that the generals are all prepared to fight the previous war. So again, in World War I, they started off wearing, the French in particular, started off by wearing bright blue uniforms because that's what they did back in the Napoleonic era. They wore red if they were from England, and they wore blue typically if they were from France. Again, World War II, the military, or especially the French, again, sorry to pick on the French, but this is just the way it is, they were ready to fight the trench-style warfare by building the Maginot Line, and then the Blitzkrieg came through and absolutely obliterated it. So we're always prepared to fight the previous war, but we are not prepared to fight the current war. And so the way that relates to what's happening now is we know, or we think we know what fascism looks like, and also communism and all the negative things in the past where we've got people going to gulags and starving to death. We've got the Mao and the revolution over there as well. Lots of people, unfortunately, with military conflict and just general conflict overall, are passing away. However, with the tools and the resources and the knowledge that's available right now, do you think that the current people in power trying to push this 2030 agenda, do you think they're going to use the same tactics as Stalin or Hitler or Mao used in the past? No, they're not. They're not going to do that. And that's what we're seeing right now. This is why things like that, like people are thinking that war and conflict is what it used to be in the past, but we are now up to the time where this is the conflict, right? And I just wonder if Hitler or Stalin or Mao, if they had the tools, resources, and knowledge available, would they have tried to implement their goals the same way that they did, or would they be doing it differently? And if they would have been doing it differently, would they have done anything that resembles what's happening right now? I think that's something that we need to think about it. So the main point of this video, the main thing I want you guys to get out of this video is the fact that we are in a race against time, right? And as time goes on, we're going to get to the point where we get to the point of no return, right? We're going to get to the point where we are at the point of no return, and it'll be too late for us to do anything about it. And what we need to do is try to wake up more people before this happens. But let's be a little bit more practical. What can we actually do about this? So the first thing that I would say is to not get caught up in what might be happening and who might be doing what and why. So for example, right now I'm very well aware there's a big misinformation campaign going on, but within the freedom movement potentially there's arguments that Putin's fighting the system and the deep state, and maybe Trump's fighting the system, but then Trump came out in support of Ukraine, and there's all sorts of different thoughts and opinions. None of that really affects us. If they are for the freedom movement, great. If they're not for the freedom movement, not so great, but what can we do about that? All we can do is remain fixated on what is happening right now and what we can do about it. So don't spend all of your time speculating on why certain things might be happening. There's information out there that's apparently misinformation. It's very, very confusing right now if you're watching the news, and not just mainstream media, but all the independent media as well, whether the Ukraine had the bioweapons and that's what Russia's attacking. There's a lot of, we just don't know at this stage. So try not to be fixated on or spend too much time focusing on those sorts of things, about why certain things are happening. Just focus in on what is, right, and what you can do about it. The next thing you can do is start understanding that you're going to need to prep your mind mentally to live in a dichotomy. Now, if you're familiar with Jocko Willink, he talks about the dichotomy of leadership quite a lot, and that's a dichotomy is essentially there's just two different extremes, right? So what we do need to do is be, aware of the future and aware of the disaster that we're heading towards if we don't step up and take action. But we also need to make sure we don't get overwhelmed and burnt out by that. We need to also remain in the present and the relative good quality of life we still have for most of us, again, depending on where you are right now. But we need to remain, be able to live in a dichotomy where we can put ourselves into the future to realize the negative impacts of where we're going, but also not get overwhelmed and live in the present and enjoy what we've got right now as well. So definitely start preparing or just thinking through about living in that dichotomy of, again, the future and the present. We also need to start thinking about what alternative outcomes can look like, right? So if all we do is focus on preventing what they want, there's a few things around this, but They say, I think in race car driving, if you lose control in your car, you don't want to look at the wall of where you're going to crash, because that's where you're going to steer. You want to look where you want to go, and you're going to naturally steer away from it. But the other thing too is, if all we do is spend all of our time focusing on preventing what they're trying to implement, we're not going to know what to do if we win, right? And again, I say if, there is still a good chance and possibility that we can turn this around, but it's definitely no guarantee, which I'll cover in a moment. But it's like the US military with Iraq and Afghanistan in particular in recent history. They won the war. They invaded Iraq, and same with Afghanistan, but they didn't really know what to do once they'd won, or they hadn't planned for what happens after the fight is over. And so what we need to do is start thinking about what is the alternative, you know, because I think we've got a lot of great things out there and technology and all this sort of stuff, but we can actually live an incredible life and an incredible future. But we need to start imagining and envisioning what that could look like. Because the other thing too is, you know, if we start thinking about alternatives, you know, alternative futures, it gives us that hope, right? And it also allows us to imagine. And Einstein says that imagination is more important than knowledge. Okay, that's what he said back in the day, which is very, very important. And it helps us keep that spark of hope alive as well. Now, again, we're going to be covering a lot of content around this in future videos, so do make sure to subscribe or sign up to the email list. Click the link somewhere around this video, whatever you see, to follow along with what we're putting out there. But I just want to leave you guys with this. Their worst nightmare, now the people who are trying to implement the Great Reset, their worst nightmare is a mass of people, right, who are awake, who are independent of their systems, and who have the courage to speak out, right, to speak the truth, but also live by the truth, right? So it is essential that you, me, all of us take steps, right, to prepare ourselves and our loved ones economically, mentally, with relationships, and essentially all these different areas to make sure that we can remain independent, we can remain awake, and we can remain courageous. I like to think of it as an airplane, right? We are in an airplane that is crash landing. Now, again, whether it's an intentional crash landing or not is regardless. It is just crash landing. Don't try to focus on the why or how, well, the whys in particular. We are crash landing. Now, currently on our current course, with this thing here, we are heading towards a desolate island that's ravaged by volcanoes, and it's got all the worst things in the world. That is where we're heading. That is our current course. If we do not stop, if we do not alter the course, that is where we're going to end up. However, if we alter the course of the plane just slightly, right, we can actually crash land into a beautiful paradise, right, that has all the stuff that we ever want and need. Where this plane ends up is up to us, ultimately. Now, you who are watching this, right, at the present time, and you know, fighting the good fights, you're among us pioneers, right? We are kicking down the door for this movement and trying to wake people up, and that can be very, very frustrating, because those of us at the front, the pioneers, the ones who do, they kick down the doors, they push, and they make the initial action. We are the ones who are going to feel the brunt of the resistance. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to endure. We need to play the long game, and as the guys at the S2 Underground say, always remember to fight in the shade. And with that, I'll see you in another video. Bye for now.